That's Jim Dunaway. I'm Clint Lamb, and you're listening to the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jim, first of all, appreciate you joining me.
No
This is a
problem, man.
conversation that I've been wanting to have for a little while with you, just because, whether it be Alabama specifically, the SEC, college football playoff rankings, everybody's complaining about that. They do that every single year. But before we get into the college football playoff rankings, obviously there was a little bit of a rough stretch for Alabama there for about a month or so. But I wanted to get your thoughts on how are you feeling about this Alabama team based off of what we've seen over the last couple of games?
I would say this, and I've got no insider information. In fact, when I asked all my sources ever since the Tennessee game, the answer when I asked, is Jalen Milroe healthy? They always told me he is healthy as anyone else. But I think if you look at what happened against Georgia and what happened against LSU, I don't think Nick Sheridan all of a sudden forgot how to call plays. I don't think the offensive line forgot how to block. I don't think Jalen Milroe forgot how to run. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that along the way, in some degree and fashion, that Alabama's quarterback was not himself for a big stretch of games there, including at Tennessee, where I think all of our listeners and viewers here on Cover Crimson can go back and pull up moments in that game where it looked like he had ways to run the football, places to run the football, and look at the game plan, how many times Alabama dropped him back to pass and didn't design the runs that they designed the other night against LSU. And I just don't think, I'm not going to sit here and believe that Nick Sheridan went into that Tennessee game with that bad of a game plan. I think they went in because they were protecting their quarterback. That's the way I'm going to move forward. I've got no information on that. And I think what you saw Saturday night against a team that is, mid-tier college football when it comes to rush defense. So I have to take it with a little dose of medicine there that LSU's rush defense is not the best in the country. But I think the team you saw Saturday night in Baton Rouge is the team we thought this Alabama team could be this year. And I think if they can do that 3 more times, they'll either be in the SEC championship game and or the college football playoffs, or most likely both. And I think they'll be a tough out once they get there, as long as Milroe stays healthy and they continue to commit to running the football. And it wasn't just Milroe's big explosive plays. As I'm watching that game from Baton Rouge up high in that press box, I kept telling anyone that would listen around me, I'm so impressed with Nick Sheridan continuing to run Jam Miller and Justice Haynes into the wall. It may have only been 4 yards. It may have only been 5 yards or 3 yards, but they continued to have the traditional run game too, that I think continued to open the door for Jalen Milroe to have a big night. I loved the game plan. It was perfect against LSU. That game plan may not be the perfect one at Oklahoma. It may not be the perfect one when you get to the playoffs, but for that night, it was a perfect game plan. And I've just been so impressed with this coaching staff in so many different levels. And that's another one this past week.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on the whole Jalen Milroe health thing. And the reason is that I feel like that you wonder, okay, why would maybe they not be completely forthcoming with that if that were the case? In a lot of ways, it would kind of mask criticism because you're saying, okay, he's not 100%. But a couple of things. If let's say hypothetically, which we have nothing to say that this is what was the problem or whatever, but let's say it was an ankle injury. If you're limited in that way, you're now telling defenses, okay, you don't have to take Jalen Milroe's legs as seriously as you would if he was 100% healthy. He's going to be hindered and limited in that way. You want them to prepare for him just like they would with him being 100% healthy. Number 2, it's kind of, it happens in football. If a defense knows that you've got an injury, especially at the quarterback position, it's possible, they can try to do some things to aggravate that injury, force you out of the game, do all that stuff. And so, I think at that position with Jalen Milroe, whether it's possible that he was fine enough to play and they've been completely, truthful in that, but I also think it's possible there would be some reasons for you maybe not to want to disclose that if that were the case. And when you're watching him, it makes complete sense that he go ahead.
That first run, I mean, all you had to do is look at that first run when he's 3 yards in the middle of the crowd and he hits a little button in that acceleration game that he has, and he just pops out of the crowd there. That is typical 100% healthy Jalen Milroe. And you can go back to the run to the pylon against South Carolina. He had a piano on his back as he was trying to get into the end zone. He didn't have that same burst. So they can say whatever they want to say. Both of those reasons you give are good. It's a crazy world we live in. Technically, you're not supposed to give up any injury information about a player for HIPAA rules and such like that. You sign something if you're an athlete that allows the school to say some things. But if you got a guy who, has the potential to be an NFL first-round draft pick, you want the parents and everyone to sign off on any information that's going out about him. And, whether or not, the Milroes may have not wanted any information leaked about an ankle injury or anything else. Who knows? All I know is Jalen Milroe, when he is healthy and has the ability to play like he did the other night, he's one of the 1, 2, 3 best quarterbacks in all of college football, and NFL teams will flock to him to have him on the team. And when he's a little banged up, like he was, in my belief, in between there, he's a guy that probably doesn't show up 1, 2, 3 on draft board. So it was good to see the real Jalen Milroe back.
Yeah, and from like an SEC injury report perspective, if it's hindering a guy, like he's not able to go fully in practice or whatever, then you got to, I'm pretty sure you have to disclose that kind of thing on that injury report. But if he's still, if it's just a slight, something's not quite got him at 100%, it's hindering him a little bit, but it's not, he's still doing everything in practice that he normally would and doing all that, then I don't think you have to disclose that because it's not hindering him in any sort of way. He's not questionable, that whole thing. So yeah, that would make perfect sense. And you're right, with a healthy Jalen Milroe, I don't think as a passer, he really has the ability to elevate those around him. I don't think Carson Beck has that ability. There are really very few quarterbacks who do. But when you add in back his legs, it takes away such a strain, or it puts such a strain on opposing defenses that it opens up everything else. And I think that what you saw was Nick Sheridan kind of be, he wasn't handcuffed in this game for whatever reason, whether it be something, a mental hurdle that Jalen Milroe was dealing with, whether it be physical, something felt like not only it was wrong with Milroe, but it felt like Nick Sheridan from a play calling perspective was, whether it be protecting the offense, protecting Milroe, something was there, seeing him kind of be able to be unleashed a little bit. This guy's a phenomenal play caller, and he's got Kalen DeBoer in his ear. They're coming up with the game plan. I don't want to give Nick Sheridan all the credit, but at the same time, he's the one that's dialing it up in real time. And so you got to give him a lot of credit for what he was able to do. And just really with the defense, earlier in the season, Jim, we were really criticizing the defense. And it felt like based off of what they were doing compared to how they kind of ran things under Nick Saban, there was going to be some transition. Guys were playing different roles, one gapping more compared to two gapping. The way that the Wolf is playing off the ball, you're playing a lot of one high safety, not the two high stuff as much. A lot of zone coverage with some man mixed in, but it was more, they're working around some personnel and the youth there. But it really feels like on that side of the football, things have really come together nicely. And this feels like, I don't want to say it's like a complete team, but I would say compared to some of the others that are in this conversation, I think they're a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, the defense for me is something that I never thought we'd get to the point we've seen the last couple of games. And listen, you can say what you want about LSU's defense and their run defense, but LSU's receivers are good. And I believe Nussmeier will play in the NFL. He's good. They got 2 NFL first-round draft picks at tackle. They may be a little sketchy at guard and center, but they have 2 NFL players at tackle. It's a good way to anchor your offensive line. They have an NFL tight end. And for Alabama to go out there and do what they did to them defensively, I'm sold on Kane Womack and this scheme. I wasn't even going into this game. I was still like, that defense still has an uneasy feeling for me. But what they were able to do at Tennessee in a loss, they did enough against a really good Tennessee team to win that football game. And then what they've done since then has been just spot on. And the last 2 games have been works of art. So it is working. I thought it was the linebackers that dominated this game for Alabama. I thought it was Jahad Campbell's best game ever at Alabama. He had so many big plays. Lawson is so good, but that young secondary with Keon Sabb out, that young secondary stepped up. I wrote it down. It was 9 minutes and 44 seconds in the third quarter when Lacey, their best receiver, caught his first ball. And I watched them all night long. And those corners were man on man. Never had a bracket help, never had double coverage. It was man on man or a zone, but a lot of times it was one on one with their best receiver. And because of the pressure up front or just great coverage, no catches for their best receiver until 9:44 in the third quarter. And at that point, Alabama had already housed the game. So hats off to Kane Womack. I'm thinking about sending him, if they still do this, from FTD and Merle Olson's old florist. I need to send some flowers to him and apologize because I've been riding him all year, and he has proved me wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, you're 100% correct. I was very impressed with the job. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, Garrett Nussmeier, it turned the football over. A lot of that was interior pressure. A lot of that was really Garrett Nussmeier not having a whole lot of places to go with the football. Like when I went back and watched the all 22, I'm trying to, what you didn't see was the coverage bust, which you saw against Tennessee. You saw, I mean, obviously there have been times, even Byron Brown and USF back in week 2, there were cover busts down the field that USF wasn't able to take advantage of. Very few teams have been able to, even though it's been there. Georgia, I thought there were some opportunities downfield that they did not capitalize on. But in this particular game, which makes the second game, but it makes a lot more sense here because Luther Burden, with the limitations at quarterback from Missouri in that game, makes sense that they wouldn't have a whole lot available downfield. But for this game, this is something that I thought LSU would be able to do, and they weren't. And that was more of a product. It wasn't that they weren't taking advantage of opportunities. It's because the opportunities weren't there. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, it has felt like when you look at these college football playoff contenders, is there anybody, maybe Ohio State with the running backs that they have, but I think up front offensively, they're maybe not as quite as good as they've been in some years. I think Georgia with their offensive line, you talked about the interior with LSU. Is there anybody that stands out as far as college football playoff contenders? Because Alabama has this problem too, and I think a lot of people they hone in on their own team and they think it's exclusive to them. But it feels like a lot of these competitive teams right now, they're struggling to run the football consistently. Is it the era of college football? Or is there anybody that maybe stands out to you that is running the football pretty effectively, pretty consistently? It seems to me like a lot of, especially in the SEC, maybe Tennessee has run the football pretty well, but outside of them, is there anybody that stands out to you?
Well, I'll tell you the problem in college football and why I like Alabama's chances if they're able to dot the I's and cross the T's in these final 3 games and make it to the college football playoffs. Why I like their chances is I think they have at least three center, guard, and left tackle on that side of the ball that will play in the NFL and could all be first-round draft picks at some point. I just don't think offensive line play is as good in college football and on up to the NFL as it was 10 years ago. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we do in youth and high school football with all the 7-on-7s that we do. And then we start doing the rule changes that help the offenses out and all of that. It makes it harder to play defense. So now I think you're getting so many of the great athletes who could gain weight and play offensive line that are staying slim and they're playing a pass catching tight end. Or maybe they're a 6'5" instead of a 6'5", 290 guy. They're going 6'5" and 250 and playing quarterback. I mean, it's changed so much of the positions you can play and where the money is. And, I think we're heading to an era where offensive line play, if you've got a good offensive line, you're at a premium. I just don't think the offensive line is coached the way it used to be coached, and there's not as many of the great athletes going to the offensive line. So that gives, I think, at this moment in time, Alabama an advantage in maybe at Ohio State and a couple other teams when they get to the playoffs, that they've got a really good NFL offensive lineman or 2 or 3 that could help into the playoffs. Now, the running game has been hurt by the lack of the offensive line. I think Alabama's defensive line dominated LSU's NFL tackles. And then if you flip it around, if you go back and watch that tape as you did, how many of the running plays, traditional or with Milroe, did the LSU linebackers have to literally get out of the way of their defensive linemen falling back into them? They were getting knocked off the ball back into the laps of the linebackers for LSU, and that just prevents their freedom of movement to getting to the hole, slowing them down a step, and that's how you get big run plays. So I think Alabama has an advantage over a lot of teams if they are able to make it to the college football playoffs that could end up with this being a magical season. I look around everybody that's in the playoffs, and all through the Saban years, I am a worst case scenario guy. And there was always one team that I would circle that I did not want to play, like 2012 Georgia in the SEC championship game. I had no problem with Alabama playing Notre Dame. I was like, God, if Alabama can beat Georgia in Atlanta, I think they'll win a national championship. I felt good about the rematch against LSU in 11. I was a little worried about Texas in 09 until I saw Texas get off the bus. There have just been certain teams I've worried about every year in college football, even with Nick Saban as the coach. I look at everyone that's going to be in this playoff, and I think to myself, Alabama could beat any of these teams. They can beat Oregon. They can beat Ohio State, Indiana, Penn State, Texas. Texas doesn't scare me half as much this year as they did last year. Georgia, they've already beaten. I'd hate to play them again, but in a way I wouldn't. Tennessee, I felt like healthy Jalen Milroe, you can win that. There's nobody in this bracket that I think Alabama couldn't beat. And I don't know if I can always say that every year. On years they've won a national championship. And I just think that's where we are in college football. The parity is real. Oregon is unbeaten, but I've seen them struggle to beat Idaho. Ohio State only has a loss to Oregon. I think that game with Indiana will be fascinating, but that team, it hasn't looked the same offensively like it has in yesteryear. So I like where Alabama is right now, man. If they can stay healthy, particularly at quarterback, and get to the college football playoffs, I think the door is open for a magical ending to happen for this team.
Yeah, I think they got the right combination of guys. I mean, just offense, defense, worry about the field goal kicking just because we still don't know a whole lot about it.
Yeah.
If games come down to that, then I think it would just be an unknown, not necessarily a weakness or a bad thing.
I watch him, Clint. I watch him in warm-ups and stuff, and I know they've rolled him out for a couple of 50-yarders. And I looked over, I had the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Detroit Lions scouts sitting next to me, and in Baton Rouge. And when they came out, I think it was going to be a 52-yarder was the attempt. And I think the way Kalen DeBoer was explained about the wind swirling, I think technically at the back going towards where the Alabama fans were. So with the wind at his back, I told the scout as he was coming out, I said, he can't make this kick. And he goes, really? And I said, no, I don't think he can. I got him going this direction, 47 at my limit, just watching him, and going into the wind that night, I would have had him at 43 going into the wind. And sure enough, the kick, I think it was a little off, but also it came up about 5 yards short. 47, I'm 42 to 47 is sort of the limit for him, depending on the wind, in my opinion. I think he's really good inside 40. And, that's the way, Alabama's won national championships with lesser kickers. You just got to know what you got. You got to know what you got. You don't roll him out for a 52, 55-yarder. You decide to go for it in that situation, or punt and play the field position game.
Yeah, I mean, and that is exactly right. I feel the same way. Punting, offense, defense. I love the fact that the defense forces turnovers. I think in those big games, if you can make guys uncomfortable, you can, get the ball out, intercept, whatever, create some added possessions for your offense. I think that positions you really well. Alabama in that Tennessee game, they didn't take advantage of those opportunities. I think with a healthy Milroe, with that offense kind of chumming along a little bit better, humming along a little bit better, I think they can do that more consistently. So I'm right there with you. And, I will be curious to see how these last three games go, simply because no one's really going to be giving any of these three teams a chance. Obviously Mercer, that no one's going to give them a chance, whether it doesn't matter how good they are on that level. Nick Saban would be flipping out right now, if he heard me say that, but I mean, it's true. from a media's perspective, no one's going to give them a chance. But going on the road to Norman, that's a tough place to play. Oklahoma has really struggled this year, but they can cause problems. Auburn in the Iron Bowl, whether it be in Bryant-Denny or Jordan-Hare Stadium, you never know what can happen with that. But it just feels like Alabama's gotten over kind of that hurdle. Last year, it kind of felt like it was Georgia in the SEC championship. Like you said, there were certain teams you didn't want to play. It's like, man, if Alabama can get past Georgia, I think they're winning the national championship. I don't think anybody's slowing them down in the playoffs. And that obviously ended up not being the case because the parity is very real. But, at the same time, though, I'll be curious to see how they handle now that everybody's kind of singing their praises again.
Yeah, and Mercer will be a great test. For those that don't know, they're number 7 in the FCS rankings. They're basically like playing North Dakota State, South Dakota State, some of the best FCS teams. So you'll have a talented team in Mercer, and one of those that the score won't look good if you come out there and you don't play buttoned up. And so it'll be interesting to see the maturity level of this team and how they play against Mercer. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you it's going to be a dangerous game. It should not be, but weirder things have happened in football. Then Oklahoma on the road with that defense, that'll be a challenge. And then Auburn's a rivalry game. And then it's, realistic possibility if things shake out the way they're supposed to, Alabama will get to, I won't say have to, will get to go play for an SEC championship. And listen, I'm going to plead to my Alabama friends here and fans. Let's don't bitch and moan about that. If we end up in Atlanta playing for the SEC championship, there are only so few championships that you can win in a given year, and the SEC championship is one of them. Nobody has won more of those than the University of Alabama. So if we get a chance to go in Atlanta and play for the SEC championship, I know it's cool to maybe just skip it and be in the playoffs. I do not think that a 2-loss SEC championship game loser will be left out of the playoffs. I don't think Alabama will have one bit to worry about in Atlanta if they lost that game. But I don't even like that mindset. Let's go to Atlanta and put another SEC championship year in that practice facility. Put another SEC championship and put one more space in between Alabama and the rest of the league on trying to catch them all time. That another SEC title probably gets me to the end of my life to where nobody can catch them. I think it's asterisk at that point. I will die with Alabama leading the SEC in all-time championships. I don't think mathematically, unless I go Old Testament and live for a long, long time, I think I can put that one in the win column for me.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I mean, because it's like if you get to that point, you either win the game and you get a first-round bye. So everybody complaining about, well, you got to play this extra game. It's like, no, it cancels it out. And then, really you can say, okay, if they didn't have to play in it, it's possible they would get a first-round home playoff game. They could be in that, 5 to 8 range. But it's like, okay, but you don't have to worry about the threat of not getting in the college football playoff. I think more so if you get to 10 wins, you're fine regardless. So, I mean, you got to be 10-2 to make it into the SEC championship, or at least in Alabama's case. And if you get to that 10-win mark, I don't care if it's 10-2 or 10-3, I think you're getting in. So, I mean, yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that should be the approach. And, I mean, Kalen DeBoer coming into the SEC first year, after, the greatest college football coach of all time retires. I mean, he comes in and wins an SEC championship in year one, or at the very least has that opportunity. I think that would speak volumes because me personally, I didn't have Alabama in the SEC championship this year. I had Texas playing Georgia. And so, that would be exceeding my expectations for year one under Kalen DeBoer. And so I think fans should embrace that. Jim, I appreciate you so much. I know I've taken up a little bit more of your time than I told you I would, but thank you so much for hopping on here with me. This has been phenomenal. Anything else you want to add before we hop out of here?
No. I'm just looking forward to the ending here and see how the committee ends up judging these SEC teams, because they've got to factor in strength of schedule. If they don't, then we're going to have to go back and redo the whole format, because the SEC is by far, even the Big Ten this year, the toughest conference top to bottom. And if we don't factor in strength of schedule, then we're not doing this right.
1,000. I mean, great way to put it. Jim, appreciate you. Appreciate all the listeners. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Cover Crimson, and then get on over to covercrimson.com. We got a great message board community. I mean, just the amount of people who have joined just in the last week and are starting to contribute to the conversations. It's been a lot of fun. It's certainly want everybody to be a part of that that's listening in. We continue a lot of these conversations over there. So if you haven't already, go sign up, and we will talk to you guys soon. Appreciate you, Jim.